Raiskin and Lorelei entered the council chamber to find the atmosphere changed, lighter, yet charged with anticipation. Professor Nevrin stood at a table piled with ritual drafts, while Marinel and Tavern, already deep in discussion, beckoned them over. "We need your voice," Marinel said, eyes shining. "You saw what remembering can do. It's time to shape the words, not just the magic." As the group gathered, Randall motioned for them to take the lead. Raiskin hesitated only a moment before stepping forward, Lorelei at his side. Together, they began to outline the first official remembrance ritual, a circle where each participant would speak a memory, painful or joyful, aloud, and the group would echo it back in acceptance. Tavern suggested a rune of compassion to be drawn on each hand, anchoring the magic in shared vulnerability. Marinel, her illusions flickering with color, offered to weave images of the lost so all could see and remember. The council listened, adding their wisdom, refining the words and gestures. The ritual grew, no longer a weapon, but a living promise that sorrow would not be hidden or weaponized again. As the final incantation was inscribed, a subtle warmth filled the chamber, as if the academy itself exhaled in relief. Randall sealed the document with the Blackstaff sigil, declaring, "Let this be our legacy, compassion made tradition." Outside, bells rang to mark the evening hour. Raiskin felt the weight of past sorrows lift, replaced by hope and responsibility. The ritual was ready, but its true test would come in the days ahead, when old wounds met new voices, and memory became the magic that bound them all. With the ritual scroll in hand, Raiskin stepped into the great hall as the assembled students and faculty looked on. The flickering light from hundreds of candles cast long, uncertain shadows, but the air was charged with anticipation. Marinel and Tavern took their places beside him, while Lorelei stood opposite, her silver ring glinting as she raised her hand in invitation. Raiskin spoke first, his voice steady but resonant. "We gather not to banish sorrow, but to honor it. Each memory, spoken aloud, becomes a thread in the tapestry of who we are." One by one, participants stepped into the circle. A trembling first year recalled the friend he lost to the shadows. A wary professor spoke the name of a student she had failed to protect. For each, the group echoed the memory, hands outstretched, the rune of compassion glowing faintly on their skin. As the circle grew, Marinel's illusions shimmered above them, visages of the lost, the redeemed, and the forgotten, each surrounded by gentle light. The magic of remembrance wove through the chamber, not as a weapon, but as a balm. Raiskin felt the black crystal's song quiet within him, its sorrow soothed by the chorus of shared voices. Even the oldest wounds seemed to soften, their edges blunted by empathy and acceptance. When the ritual ended, a hush lingered. Randall, visibly moved, declared, "Tonight, we have changed our fate. Let the world remember. No shadow is too deep for compassion to reach." Raiskin looked at his friends, Marinel wiping away tears, Tavern beaming with pride, Lorelei offering a silent vow. Together, they had not just defeated a curse. They had rewritten the legacy of Blackstaff itself. The sealed archives lay beneath the east wing, their iron-bound doors etched with warning wards that flickered faintly as Raiskin traced his fingers along the cold stone. Lorelei accompanied him, her silver ring glowing softly as she whispered the unlocking phrase. The doors parted with a reluctant creak. revealing a narrow corridor lined with dust-choked shelves and ancient, rune-marked chests. A hush blanketed the chamber, broken only by the echo of their footsteps. Mirinal slipped in behind them, her hands weaving a gentle light to push back the gloom. Tavern remained at the threshold, ready to raise wards if the shadows stirred. As they moved deeper, Raiskin felt the presence of sorrow, old but not hostile. Wisps of shadow gathered near a sealed alcove, coalescing into the faint outline of a young man draped in tattered noble robes, the Varan here, his face pale with longing and regret. Raiskin spoke quietly, recounting the new ritual and the Academy's vow to remember. The specter's form flickered, anguish yielding to hope. "Thank you," the spirit whispered, voice trembling with centuries of grief. "Bind my name with the living. Let them know I was not only what I became." As Raiskin recited the here's name, Alaran Viren, the spirit smiled faintly, the chains of shadow unraveling, dissolving into gentle motes of light. The chamber's oppressive air lifted. Other spirits, faint but grateful, shimmered at the edges of the torchlight, their burdens eased as names were spoken aloud. The legacy of silence was broken, and the archives became a sanctuary, not for secrets but for remembrance and peace. The group fanned out among the shelves, dust swirling in the lamplight as Raiskin led the search. Moranal's gentle spell revealed faint echoes of magic. Here, a cracked mirror radiating cold, there a brooch whose gemstone pulsed with a restless blue. Tavern carefully lifted a velvet-wrapped bundle, revealing a tarnished signet ring scorched with shadowy runes. As he passed it to Raiskin, a chill crept up their arms. But the new ritual's magic seemed to keep the worst at bay. Lorali paused at a rune-marked chest, her silver ring glowing brighter as she traced the lock. Inside, they found a set of letters sealed with ancient wax, each addressed to Alaran Viren, their words trembling with fear and longing. Raiskin set the bundle aside for the archivists, feeling the sorrow of the Viren family lingering in the air, but also a sense of closure beginning to form. As they gathered the last of the cursed items, mirror, ring, brooch, and letters, Raiskin whispered the names of those tied to each object, letting the ritual's warmth echo through the shadows. The oppressive magic faded, replaced by a quiet peace. Even the air felt lighter, as if the archives themselves were finally allowed to rest. When they emerged, arms full of sealed relics, Professor Nevern waited at the door. He regarded the group with quiet pride. "You've done what many thought impossible, not just breaking curses but healing wounds. The legacy of silence ends tonight." The Academy's future, Raiskin realized, would be shaped by remembrance, and by the courage to face darkness together. Raiskin found a quiet alcove in the Academy's library, shielded by dense stacks and the hush of unread tomes. Setting the cursed mirror on the desk, he traced its chipped silver frame, feeling the cold pulse of shadow magic radiating from its surface. As he gazed into the glass, his own reflection shimmered, overlaid by fleeting images, faces twisted in sorrow, hands reaching out from a darkness deeper than the night. For a heartbeat, he saw his own eyes reflected back, but they were not his, they were streaked with shadow, ancient grief peering through. He summoned a gentle thread of shadow magic, weaving it into the mirror's aura. Pain lanced through his mind, a flood of memories not his own. Each belonged to someone who had once touched the mirror, a grieving mother clutching it as a last keepsake, A desperate student seeking answers to forbidden questions, a lonely professor unable to let go of loss. The mirror had become a prison for these fragments, trapping not just curses but the ache of unresolved farewells. Muranel appeared at the edge of the alcove, her presence steadying. She extended her hand, her illusion magic blending with Raiskin's shadow weaving, softening the mirror's chill. Together, they coaxed the images to speak, listening as each fragment whispered its sorrow and, in turn, its hope for release. Raiskin realized the mirror's curse could be unraveled, not by brute force, but by helping each memory find peace. As the last echo faded, a faint warmth spread from the mirror, the shadow magic lessening. It was still dangerous, but now held the potential for healing, if used with care and compassion. The path forward, Raiskin understood, was not just to contain the darkness, but to guide it toward resolution. Raiskin's breath fogged the glass as he fixed his gaze on a single, flickering image deep within the mirror. A boy clutching the cold frame, his eyes wide with terror. Shadows rippled behind him, voices overlapping in a chorus of regret. Ignoring the sting of their memories, Raiskin reached out with a tendril of shadow magic, threading his own sorrow into the boy's pain. The world shimmered. Suddenly, he was inside the memory. The library around him faded, replaced by a cramped attic in Waterdeep's dock ward. Lamplight wavering over crates and moth-eaten cloaks. The boy, no older than 12, sobbed as a cloaked figure pressed the mirror into his hands. "Take it. Remember my face. If you forget, I'll never come home." The figure's voice trembled with desperation, and the boy nodded, tears glinting on his cheeks. The memory twisting the door slammed, footsteps retreated, and the boy was left alone, clutching the mirror as shadows pooled at his feet. Raiskin felt the ache of abandonment, the burden of a child's promise to remember. The shadow magic crackled at the memory's edges, hungry to feed on the boy's sorrow, but Raiskin resisted, sending warmth, his own memory of family and hope, into the echo. The attic brightened for a moment, the darkness receding. The boy's image lifted its head, eyes meeting Raiskin's through the glass, and whispered, "Thank you." Raiskin blinked, returning to the library. The mirror's curse had loosened further, a faint golden glow pulsing beneath the silver frame. More than a clue, he now sensed a link. The mirror had passed through the hands of Waterdeep's underground collectors, each one marked by loss and the promise to remember. The trail at last was opening. Raiskin steadied himself, feeling the glass cold beneath his fingertips as he let his mind slip deeper into the cursed mirror's web. Shadows curled at the edges of his vision, a dizzying succession of faces, each flickering through decades of Waterdeep's underbelly. He clung to details. A scarred dwarf merchant bargaining in a candlelit cellar, a masked noblewoman pressing the mirror into a velvet pouch, a gaunt tiefling boy clutching it at the edge of a rain-slicked alley. Each owner carried a secret grief, leaving a trace in the mirror's memory. The visions accelerated, plunging Raiskin into a whirl of whispered deals and desperate exchanges. Shadow magic pressed harder, demanding a price for every secret revealed. Through the pain he glimpsed the same crest, a stylized serpent, passed from hand to hand, often accompanied by a coded phrase, the collector's mark. A final image surged forth, a dimly lit storeroom deep beneath a Waterdeep tavern, a crate stacked high, and a hooded figure carefully inscribing runes onto a ledger. The mirror, placed atop a stack of other cursed artifacts, pulsed with restless energy. Raiskin recognized the tavern's sigil, a red griffin rampant, seared into the wall behind the figure. With a gasp, Raiskin tore himself free, sweat beading on his brow. Miranel caught his arm just as he swayed, her voice urgent but gentle. "What did you see?" she asked. Raiskin, heart pounding, recounted the collector's mark, the serpentine crest, and the Griffin Tavern's hidden storeroom. The trail was cleared, the artifacts flowed through a clandestine network, and their next step lay somewhere beneath Waterdeep's bustling streets. As the last echoes of shadow receded, Raiskin knew their search would soon lead them into the depths of the city's underworld, where answers waited, but so did new dangers. Navigating Waterdeep's labyrinthine streets after dusk, Raiskin led Miranel toward an unassuming tavern tucked beneath a sagging sign. A red griffin rampant, just as in the vision. The din inside was lively, but Raiskin slipped past the crowds to a shadowed corner, where a wiry halfling lounged, nursing a mug of ale. This was Darren Quickpockets, a longtime informant for those who knew which palms to grease. Raiskin dropped a silver coin onto the table, then traced a quick sigil in the air. The thieves' sign for urgent business. Darren's eyes flicked to Miranel, then to the coin, and he nodded. "You're not the first to come asking about the collector's mark," he whispered. "There's a network moving cursed goods. Quiet, efficient, and ruthless. They meet below. If you want in, you'll need a token. Something marked by sorrow." Miranel produced the mirror, its frame still faintly glowing. Darren's eyebrows rose, impressed. "That'll do. There's a hatch behind the bar. Leads to the storerooms. Ask for the ledger's keeper. But be careful. Those who deal with the mark rarely walk away unchanged." As Darren melted into the crowd, Raiskin felt the weight of choice. The underworld's doors were opening, but what awaited them in the gloom beneath Waterdeep might test the limits of both shadow magic and resolve. Raiskin drew a shallow breath and let his senses unfurl, shadow magic weaving through his fingertips as he reached for the world behind the world. The silent language of wards and traps. The hatch behind the bar barely seemed to exist to mundane eyes, but as his magic brushed its contours, a ripple of cold dread prickled his skin. He felt layers, the faint echo of an alarm glyph, a shroud of forgetfulness designed to cloud the memory of any intruder, and, deeper still, a subtle, sorrowful resonance, as a stranger, as if the very wood remembered the hands of those who'd passed before. Miranel pressed close, her illusion magic blending with his shadows, softening the edges so they became little more than a whisper in the weave. Raiskin focused, threading his own pain into the spell, and gently unwound the alarm glyph, letting its energy dissipate without a sound. The forgetfulness shroud was trickier. It pressed at his mind with memories of all he yearned to forget. But Miranel's soft voice anchored him. Together, they made their approach as silent and invisible as ghosts. Behind the hatch, the air was thick with dust and secrets. A narrow stair spiraled down into gloom, lantern light flickering far below. As Raiskin and Miranel descended, the sorrowful resonance deepened, pulling at Raiskin's chest like a memory of loss. Somewhere beneath, a presence waited, ancient, burdened, and aware. The collector's mark was more than a network of thieves. It was a web of remembrance and pain, each artifact a story unwilling to fade. At the bottom, A heavy iron-bound door blocked their way, inscribed with the same serpent crest from Raiskin's visions. The test was clear. Only those who bore true sorrow could enter. The next step would reveal whether Raiskin's shadow magic was a key or a curse. Raiskin knocked softly, his pulse echoing in the silent gloom. The iron-bound door slid open a hand's width with an audible scrape, revealing a sliver of flickering lantern light and the glint of a watchful eye peering out. "Collectors," a gravelly voice demanded. Raiskin lifted the cursed mirror, its frame shimmering faintly, and replied, "We seek the ledger's keeper. The mark sent us, sorrow in hand." The door opened wider, admitting them into a cramped antechamber lined with crates, each marked with the serpent crest. At a battered desk sat a thin, sharp-featured woman, her hair pulled into a severe knot, fingers stained with ink. She regarded Raiskin and Morano with suspicion, then motioned them forward. "State your business. Only true sorrow passes these doors. The artifacts no lies." Miranelle stepped forward, her voice steady but gentle. "We wish to trace an item, one lost, one that sings to those who remember. We'll pay what's needed, in coin or memory." The woman's gaze lingered on Raiskin, her expression shifting as if she sensed the shadow within him. "Very well. Place your sorrow on the table. The mark will judge." Raiskin set the mirror down. Shadow and memory coiled in the air, the room's lanterns guttering as the artifact's magic responded to the presence of deep pain. The woman's eyes widened. She seemed to recognize the weight within Raiskin, and perhaps a flicker of respect or fear passed over her face. "Follow me," she said quietly, rising. "The ledger's keeper waits below, but bewaring what you find may bind you tighter than you expect." The collector's vaults descended deeper still, stone steps swallowing the light as Raiskin and Morano followed the woman's brisk stride. The air thickened, scented with dust, oil, and old regret. Shadows clung to every alcove, each one cradling a relic in a cracked porcelain doll, a blood-stained locket, a painting with eyes that seemed to follow them. Sorrow radiated from the artifacts, a prickling at Raiskin's skin and stirring the crystal song inside his pocket. They reached a heavy iron grate. Beyond it, a low chamber opened, lanterns casting trembling rings of gold across a massive desk heaped with ledgers, scrolls, and wax-sealed boxes. At its center sat a stooped, elderly man, his hair white, eyes sharp behind thick lenses, and fingers marked with the faded blue of old tattoos. The woman spoke softly, "Ledger's keeper, two come bearing true sorrow." The keeper's gaze swept over Morano, then settled on Raiskin, lingering, knowing. "You carry more than one burden, boy. The mark welcomes those who do not flinch from pain. What is it you seek? Knowledge, redemption, or simply a way to be free of what haunts you?" His voice was gentle, but the air crackled with the threat of secrets laid bare. Raiskin felt the urge to either confess everything or conceal it all. Here, the cost of a lie might be more than he could pay. The keeper drew forth a battered ledger, its cover inscribed with the serpent crest. "Show me the object you wish to trace. Then, tell me the sorrow that binds you to it. Only then will the mark's web reveal its threads." Raiskin set the cursed mirror gently on the ledger's keeper's desk, its surface rippling with the faintest shimmer of shadow. He met the old man's gaze and, voice low, recounted what he had witnessed stag the trapped memory within the glass. A woman weeping at a candlelit desk, clutching a letter she would never send, her grief echoing through decades. Her sorrow was bound to this mirror. Raiskin finished. But I felt another presence when I entered its memory, a man with a serpent ring, passing it into the hands of a masked youth. The ledger's keeper listened intently, his gnarled fingers tracing sigils on the ancient tome. At last, with a sigh, he opened the ledger and ran a trembling finger down a column of names, pausing at a mark shaped like a coiled serpent. That mirror was last sold to the Circle's agent, passed from a grieving widow to the collector's mark, then traded to a masked broker. The ledger gives only an alias, the Sable Fox. Miranol leaned in. Does the ledger tell where to find this Sable Fox, or who supplies them? The keeper's eyes narrowed. The fox trades from the drowned market and receives shipments from the dock ward, always at the new moon. But the real master is further up the chain, someone who pays in secrets and sorrow. If you wish to follow the trail, you will need more than courage. You will need to offer the ledger a memory of your own. The air grew heavier, the magic of the vault thick with anticipation. Raiskin realizing to unlock the next link in the chain, he must surrender a piece of his own pain. Something deeply personal, something true. Miranol drew a sharp breath, her eyes darting to Raiskin's, searching for reassurance. For a moment, the only sound was the shuffle of the ledger's keeper's ink-stained fingers. Then, with quiet resolve, she nodded. "I'll share my memory," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "We bear these burdens together." She reached into her satchel and drew out a small, painted wooden toy. Its colors faded, a relic from another life. Miranol placed it beside the mirror. "This belonged to my brother," she began, voice soft. "He vanished when I was a child. Every night I cast little illusions to light his path home, but he never returned. I learned illusion magic hoping I could one day lead him back. The pain of not knowing, of never being able to say goodbye, shaped every spell I cast." The ledger's keeper regarded her gravely, then placed a gnarled hand over the toy. Shadowy magic shimmered between his fingers, and the ledger's pages fluttered as if caught in a sudden wind. Names and dates bled across the parchment, then stilled. He looked up. "For such a memory, the mark answers true. The Sable Fox trades under the name Merrick Duskvale in the drowned market. Their next meeting is tonight, at the Bell Tower on Rattler's Lane. Follow, but beware. Merrick is only a link. The sorrow you chase is drawn to deeper darkness." Miranol's hand shook as she reclaimed her toy. Raiskin squeezed her shoulder in gratitude, feeling the bond between them solidify anew. The path forward was clear, but the cost of each answer weighed heavily on both their hearts. The ledger's keeper regarded Raiskin and Miranol with a somber gravity as they spoke. He leaned closer, voice dropping to a whisper that seemed to ripple through the thick, magical air. "The drowned market is no place for the unwary. Its alleys shift with the tide, and every shadow barters secrets. Trust no one who approaches you first, especially if they claim to know your business. The fox is shrewd but not cruel. He will not act rashly unless threatened, but his guards are loyal, and there are always eyes, some not even human." He tapped a crooked finger on the ledger. "If you must deal with the fox, Offer something he values: truth, sorrow, or a secret never spoken aloud. Threats and lies will buy you only silence, or worse. His eyes flicked to Miranel. And beware the bell tower. The market's keepers use it to sound warnings. The tolling of the bell means the mark is closing ranks. If you hear it, disappear. Miranel nodded, her resolve only hardening. Raiskin felt the shadow crystal pulse faintly, as if sensing the web of secrets tightening around them. The keeper closed the ledger with a finality that echoed in the vault's gloom. You have what you came for. May your truths be your shield. As they turned to leave, Raiskin caught a glimpse of other artifacts glimmering in the low lamplight. Silent witnesses to countless bargains. The underworld's trail now led to Rattler's Lane and the Fox, but each step forward demanded a price paid in memory, trust, or pain. The hunt for the source of the artifacts had never felt so perilous, or so close. The labyrinthine lanes of the drowned market greeted Raiskin and Miranel with a damp, salt-laden breeze as they slipped into its tangled heart. Stalls of battered canvas and scavenged driftwood pressed close, hawkers muttering in half a dozen dialects, their wares ranging from the mundane to the unmistakably arcane. Lanterns swung overhead, casting shifting shadows that seemed to conspire with the allies themselves, concealing more than they revealed. Raiskin kept a wary eye on the crowds, recalling the ledger keeper's warning. A hunched figure in a moth-eaten cloak offered counterfeit holy relics. A masked child darted past, trailing ribbons of illusion. Miranel nodded toward the bell tower, its crumbling stone silhouette rising above the market like a crooked finger. They pressed on, skirting a merchant's firelit table piled with trinkets that buzzed with faint curses. As they neared Rattler's Lane, a wiry halfling blocked their path, eyes glinting beneath a battered hat. Looking for the Fox, she asked in a voice too casual to be coincidence. Miranel tensed, but Raiskin remembered the advice offer: truth, not threats. He met the halfling's gaze. We seek knowledge, not trouble. We carry sorrow, not malice. For a heartbeat, the halfling hesitated, then gestured for them to follow. This way. Speak your piece, but keep your hands where I can see them. The alley narrowed, the noise of the market fading behind. Somewhere above, the bell tower loomed, silent for now. The meeting with the sable fox drew near, and with it the chance to trace the cursed artifacts to their mysterious master. Miranel's hand flickered at her side, barely perceptible, as she let illusionary threads settle over the alley. Shadows just slightly deeper than normal, light trickling oddly from lanterns, a subtle veil over their faces. The halfling guide cast a knowing look over her shoulder, but said nothing, leading them past a leaning stack of barrels where two burly figures lingered, half in shadow, hands close to hidden blades. At the alley's end, beneath the sagging eaves of an abandoned bellmaker's shop, a slim figure waited. Male, human, sharp-featured, with a streak of silver in his night-black hair. He wore a patched vest over a fine shirt and a fox-shaped mask fashioned from hammered tin. The sable fox, Merrick Duskvale, regarded them with an air of studied indifference. But Raiskin saw a flicker of interest as his eyes fell on the shadow crystal gleaming faintly beneath Raiskin's cloak. The fox gestured for them to enter, his voice low and precise. You carry grief and magic both. The market listens. But you must convince me why I shouldn't sound the bell and vanish, as so many others have when the Academy comes sniffing. Raiskin exchanged a glance with Morannel, feeling the weight of every warning echo in his mind. Here was the crossroads bargain, threaten or reveal. Around them, the alley seemed to hold its breath, and above, the bell tower's silhouette pressed against the sky, silent for now, but ready to toll at a single misstep. Raiskin didn't flinch. The tension in the alley was as tight as drawn wire, but he kept his voice steady. We know about the cursed artifacts, the black crystal, the ironwood rods, the relics that poison memory. Someone is flooding Waterdeep's streets with them. We need to know who supplies you, Fox. This isn't the Academy sniffing for petty contraband. Lives are at stake, souls, too. For a moment, Merrick Duskvale's expression behind the fox mask was unreadable. The halfling guide shifted her weight, hand drifting close to a concealed blade. Miranel's illusion shimmered faintly, a whisper of unreality in the lantern-lit gloom. Then the fox sighed, a real, human sound. You think you're the first desperate soul to ask, or the first to threaten me with sorrow and doom. But Yub. His gaze flicked to the shadow crystal. You carry the wound itself. That's dangerous and valuable. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. The supply comes from inside, always has. Not from some nameless street sorcerer, but from someone with access to the Academy's vaults and knowledge of its deepest wounds. They trade through intermediaries, changing faces and ciphers, but always the same mark, a ledger page torn in half, sealed with the Blackstaff's own sigil. A distant clang echoed from the bell tower, one sharp, deliberate toll. The fox's eyes widened. That's the signal. Someone knows you're here. We have minutes before the mark closes in. If you want the supplier's name, you'll have to earn it. Quickly. My price is a memorying one you'd rather forget. Share it here, now, and I'll tell you what I know. Otherwise, we're all shadows in the water. Raiskin closed his eyes, the clamor of the market fading to a hush within his mind. The memory that rose was sharp and raw. The night after Professor Talleyrand's summoning had gone a-wary, when Raiskin sat alone in his dormitory, the scent of scorched parchment still clinging to his clothes. He had tried to steady his hands, but every time he blinked, he saw the Watcher's eyes, endless and hollow, peering through the veil of reality. No one else came to him that night. Not his friends, not a mentor, only the echo of Malachar's sorrow, whispering that he would always be alone. My worst memory, Raiskin said, voice rough. It was the night I realized the darkness I carried was mine to bear, whether or not anyone believed me. I sat in the dark, listening to a voice I could not silence, and I convinced myself I would never ask for help again. That's the curse I carry. The sable fox studied him for a heartbeat, the tension in the alley thick as fog. Then, with a slow nod, he reached into his vest and withdrew a folded, ink-stained scrap, a torn ledger page marked with the Blackstaff sigil. That's payment enough. The one who moves the artifacts is called the Archivist, a professor who vanished from the rolls years ago, yet whose hand still signs the vault ledgers. They meet their buyers in the crypts beneath the old scriptorium. But you'll be hunted now, both by the mark and by the Archivist's shadows. Find the scriptorium, and you'll find your source. Above, the bell tolled again, closer, more insistent. Marinel's hand tightened on Raiskin's. The time for secrets was over. The hunt was truly begun. Marinel's eyes flashed with determination as she caught Raiskin's signal. In a heartbeat, she unfurled the illusion. Shadows writhed up from the cobbles. Twisting lantern, light into a swirling, impenetrable fog. The alley's boundaries seemed to dissolve, and phantom figures darted through the mist, each echoing the faces and garb of the mark's own enforcers. Merrick Duskvale, momentarily startled, slid back against the wall, but then nodded in grim approval. "You have your lead," he hissed. "Best run, or the next toll is the last you'll hear." He slipped away into a side passage, vanishing as quickly as he'd appeared. Raiskin grabbed Marinel's hand, and together they plunged into the illusionary haze. Footsteps thundered at the alley's mouth. Real pursuers, drawn by the bell. Through the shifting veils, Raiskin glimpsed masked figures wielding cudgels and arcane wands, their eyes wide and confused by the multiplying phantoms. Marinel's magic held just long enough for them to dart past a startled enforcer, then into a narrow, sewage-scented tunnel that sloped downward, toward the old scriptorium. Behind them, the fog began to thin and angry shouts echoed, but they were already swallowed by the darkness below. The way to the archivist, and the heart of the cursed artifact trade, lay ahead, deeper in Waterdeep's underbelly. Every step now was perilous, but Raiskin's resolve, fueled by sorrow and memory, had never burned brighter. Raiskin and Marinel pressed themselves against the damp, mossy wall as masked enforcers thundered past, their curses echoing in the tunnel. Breathing hard, a stranger, Raiskin caught Marinel's eye and nodded, time to move. Doubling back, the pair slipped through a narrow side arch, a forgotten maintenance crawlspace branching off the main sewer. Marinel wove a minor glamour to obscure their footprints, and together they crept deeper into darkness, the sounds of pursuit fading behind them. The passage twisted downward, the air thickening with the scent of old parchment, mildew, and faint, lingering magic. A faint blue sigils flickered along the cracked bricks, wards meant to deter the curious but easily bypassed by those who knew pain, as Raiskin now did. At a fork, he hesitated, recalling a lesson from the Academy archives. The scriptorium vaults were always sealed with a riddle of remembrance. Trusting his instincts, he took the left path, the one lined with faded murals of scholars and lost students. The tunnel widened, opening into a low-arched chamber strewn with broken shelves and moldy scrolls. At the far end, behind a rusted iron gate, the remains of the scriptorium beckoned, a single lantern guttered on a hook, casting warped shadows. Marinel touched Raiskin's arm, her voice barely above a whisper. "We're close. But if the archivist has eyes here, we'll need more than magic to pass unnoticed." Raiskin scanned the chamber, heart pounding. Every sense was alert. Somewhere beyond, the true source of the cursed artifacts waited. The next step would demand both cunning and courage. The final threads of the collector's network were within reach. Raiskin pressed the black crystal gently to the rusted iron bars, letting its cold weight settle in his palm. He closed his eyes, focusing on the ache of old memories and the steady pulse of sorrow that shadow magic drew from him. Shadows flickered at the edge of his vision, and then, like a song half remembered, he sensed the tangled residue of dozens of curses woven into the very stones beyond the gate. It was as if the scriptorium itself mourned, each artifact leaving a wound in the weave. Amidst the tangle, one presence stood out a mind, sharp and restless, drifting like a spectre through the shelves. The archivist. The crystal resonated with a thread of recognition. Here was the hand that had shaped the curse network, layering memory and grief into every stolen object. Raiskin's thoughts brushed against a silent alarm ward coiled around the doorway, linked to a spectral bell deeper inside. Crossing it without care would summon not just the archivist, but his guardians as well. Miranel's hand found Raiskin's, her voice tense but steady. I see the shimmer too, illusion and shadow layered. If you can distract the ward, I can slip us past with an illusion. But we need to deciding, do we risk direct confrontation, or try to learn more before we're seen? To be a stranger, the gate loomed before them, the line between hunter and hunted razor thin. The secrets of the collector's network and the root of the Academy's curse waited just beyond. Raiskin and Miranel crouched in the shadows behind a pillar of toppled stone, the cold, damp air of the scriptorium pressing in. For several tense minutes, they watched the entrance beyond the iron gate. Lantern light flickered intermittently within, casting warped silhouettes across the ruined desks and broken shelves. Twice, a cloaked figure passed through the chamber. First a hunched human in a moth-eaten robe, then a silent, masked halfling carrying a heavy satchel. Neither lingered long, each glancing warily toward a side door before vanishing deeper into the archives. Raiskin's grip tightened on the black crystal. He could feel the echo of the archivist's presence ebb and flow, as if the mastermind moved methodically among hidden wards or catches. Once, the spectral bell's ward shimmered as if tested from within, but no alarm rang. Miranel, eyes narrowed, whispered, "There's a pattern. They're checking the vaults at regular intervals, but avoiding the central days. Something important is left unwatched, maybe a trap, or an invitation." A faint, scraping noise drew their attention. A secret panel in the far wall slid open, and a gaunt, silver-bearded man in faded academic robes emerged. His eyes darted about before he placed a small, rune-marked box atop the dais, muttering a phrase that made the air hum with sorrowful magic. The panel closed behind him, leaving the box alone in the lantern's pool of light. Raiskin's heart pounded. A choice lay before them. The path to the truth was open, but the archivist's bait was unmistakably dangerous. Every instinct screamed caution, but the final link in the collector's network might be within that box. Miranel crouched beside Raiskin, her features tensed in concentration as she raised her hands, weaving a delicate illusion in the air. A flickering duplicate of herself shimmered into being, translucent but eerily lifelike, and glided toward the rune-marked box on the dais. The chamber was silent save for the faint hum of magic, every shadow seeming to lean closer as the illusion approached the bait. As the illusory Miranel reached for the box, a ripple of force lashed out from the runes. For an instant, ghostly chains erupted from the floor, ensnaring the illusion's limbs. The image shuddered as spectral bells tolled, but the magic quickly fizzled. The trap, sensing only the insubstantial nature of its target, failed to fully trigger. Instead, a faint pulse of magic surged back toward the secret panel, like a silent summons to its creator. Raiskin felt the black crystal vibrate in his hand, resonating with the magic at play. He glimpsed a fleeting vision, the archivist, pausing in a torchlit corridor, he head snapping up in alarm. Miranol caught Raiskin's eye. That's bought us a minute at most. The real ward is reactive, meant for living hands. But now the archivist knows someone is meddling. Beyond the days, footsteps echoed, slow and measured, moving closer. The time for subtlety was ending. To seize the box or slip deeper into the archives, they would have to act before the archivist arrived. Raiskin and Miranol pressed into the deep shadows behind a toppled bookcase, hearts pounding as the hidden panel slid open once more. The archivist stepped out, his silver beard gleaming in the lantern light, eyes sharp with suspicion. He paused at the gaze scanning the chamber with the wary precision of a man who trusts nothing, not even his own wards. He approached the rune-marked box and knelt, tracing the sigils with a trembling finger. Triggered, but not sprung. An intruder with subtlety. He muttered, voice barely above a whisper. Raising his head, he surveyed the room, lingering on the darker corners. Raiskin held his breath, feeling the black crystal thrum with anticipation. Shadow magic prickling at his awareness, warning of both danger and opportunity. The archivist's hand hovered over the box, then he abruptly turned toward the secret panel. "No more games," he growled, sending a pulse of shadowy magic rippling through the chamber. The air thickened, and for a moment, ghostly faces flickered in the gloom. Anguished, half-remembered students, their forms coalescing in the wards. The archivist began to speak, weaving a spell of revelation. "Show me who trespasses, and what sorrow they bring." Miranol's grip tightened on Raiskin's arm. They had seconds to either reveal themselves and attempt negotiation, slip deeper into the archives while the spell built, or use the black crystal to disrupt the ritual. Each choice fraught with risk and consequence. Slipping deeper into the labyrinthine archives, Raiskin and Miranol pressed against the cold stone walls, careful to keep their breaths shallow and steps silent. The distant chant of the archivist's spell echoed behind them, raising a spectral wind that made ancient scrolls flutter and dust swirl in midair. They passed alcoves where forgotten student portraits stared blankly, and shelves sagged beneath the weight of grief-bound tomes, each an anchor of memory and sorrow. A sudden pulse from the black crystal in Raiskin's hand drew them toward a low archway, half collapsed and choked with cobwebs. Beyond, a cramped chamber opened, lined with shelves of sealed jars. Inside, faintly glowing wisp lights drifted amid scraps of parchment and hair, personal tokens of the lost. At the center stood a pedestal bearing an ornate, iron-bound ledger. Its cover was embossed with the Academy's sigil, but a shadowy stain crawled over the crest, Malacher's presence, unmistakable and malignant. Miranol shivered. "This it," she whispered. "The ledger of the forgotten, the mastermind's confession, maybe even Malachar's original bond." As Raiskin approached, the crystal vibrated in harmony with the ledger, shadows twisting in the periphery of his vision. A whisper slithered through his mind. "Do you remember their names? Will you carry their pain, or turn away as all before you have?" The choice loomed. Open the ledger and risk exposure to its magic, attempt to take it and flee before the archivist or his spirits arrived. or try to use the black crystal to shield themselves and read only what they needed. Their next move would decide what secrets came to light and what price they would pay. Raiskin pressed his trembling hand to the ledger's cover. The shadowy stain writhed under his touch, and suddenly the world fell away. Visions exploded behind his eyes, endless rows of students, their faces flickering with hope, despair, and longing. Names poured into his mind, forgotten apprentices, exiled instructors, and those who vanished in silence. Each memory was a wound, echoing with Malachar's ancient sorrow, and Raiskin felt himself drowning in their pain. Miranel's voice was distant, a silver thread anchoring him. "You're not alone," she cried, her hand gripping his arm. Raiskin fought to stay present, forcing the memories to slow. In the center of it all, he saw a figure hunched over a desk, the mastermind professor, quill scratching confessions into the ledger. The professor's aura was twisted by grief, but his final entry was clear, a warning that Malachar's true power grew not from curses, but from the Academy's refusal to remember its own failures. A wave of cold swept through Raiskin, and for an instant he saw Malachar himself, no longer monstrous, but a scholar shrouded in sorrow, begging to be remembered. The ledger's magic receded, leaving Raiskin gasping, the black crystal glowing fiercely in his palm. He understood now to break Malachar's hold. The Academy must confront its history openly, not bury it in shame. Behind them, the archivist's spell faltered, as if the ledger's power shielded Raiskin and Miranel from detection. But the sense of urgency returned. If they lingered, the archivist would soon recover. Every answer raised new dangers, and time was running out. Raiskin clutched the ledger to his chest, the black crystal pulsing with each hurried heartbeat. Miranel led the way, weaving a faint illusion of drifting shadows to mask their passage as they retraced their steps through the labyrinthine archives. Behind them, the air trembled with a rising surge of magic. The archivist had sensed the theft, and the wailing of unseen spirits began to echo through the stone corridors. They darted past the alcoves of silent portraits and shelves heavy with dust-laden tomes, every footfall threatening to betray them. Raiskin could feel the ledger's sorrow pressing against his mind, but he steeled himself, focusing on the thread of hope that Miranel's magic offered. A distant crash and a spectral howl signaled the archivist's pursuing. "Return what is not yours! The names must not be lost again!" As they neared the hidden panel that marked their only escape, Miranel hesitated. The passage was no longer empty. A robed figure loomed in the gloom, eyes blazing with suspicion. It was Professor Nevrin. Drawn by the commotion, he raised a warding hand, his voice low and urgent. "You have the ledger. Quickly, give it to me, and I can shield you both from the archivist's wrath. But you must trust me now." The choice was stark: hand over the ledger and risk losing its secrets, try to slip past Nevrin and flee with it, or stand their ground and attempt to persuade Nevrin to join them in confronting the truth of Malachar and the Academy's forgotten wounds. Raiskin drew a trembling breath and pressed the black crystal against the ledger's iron-bound cover. Dark resonance rippled outward, forming a shimmering veil of shadow around himself and Miranel. The world beyond the shield blurred as the archivist's wrathful magic crashed against it, sparks of spectral energy scattering like fireflies against midnight glass. Inside the shield, silence reigned but for the low, mournful hum of the crystal, a song of memory, loss, and the hope of release. Miranel's hand found Raiskin's, anchoring him as the crystal's magic surged through their circle. For a heartbeat, they glimpsed each other's deepest memories. Childhood laughter, the agony of separation, the longing to be seen and forgiven. Shadow and light danced around them, neither consuming the other. The ledger's sorrowful weight eased, and Raiskin sensed its secrets opening willingly, recognizing their courage to face the truth. Outside the veil, Professor Neverin's voice echoed, thick with worry, "Raiskin, I sense what you're doing. Be careful. The shadow's mark on you is growing. If you cannot control it, the Academy itself may turn against you." Yet he did not intervene, watching with a mixture of fear and hope as the magic reached its crescendo. Suddenly, a vision burst before Raiskin's eyesing Malachar, not as a monster, but as a wary scholar surrounded by scrolls, weeping over a ledger of forgotten names. "Remember us," the spirit whispered. "That is all we ever wanted." As the vision faded, the shield dropped, leaving Raiskin and Miranel standing, changed, in the dim corridor, ledger in hand, and the path back to the Academy now uncertain, but glimmering with the possibility of healing. Raiskin and Miranel moved swiftly through the lamplit halls of Blackstaff Academy, the ledger heavy in his arms, and the black crystal still warm against his palm. With every step, the sorrowful weight of the names within the ledger pressed harder on his mind, but he pressed on, determined. They found Archmage Roandel in the faculty solarium, deep in consultation with Professors Neverin and Toleran. The tension in the air was palpable. Conversation ceased as Raiskin entered, shadow trailing behind him like a living thing. Raiskin laid the ledger and crystal on the table. "We have the truth," he announced, voice raw but resolute. Randall's gaze sharpened as he studied Raiskin. Then the shadow wreathed around him, flickering with memories both alien and familiar. Neverin's eyes widened in alarm, while Toleran's lips pressed into a grim line. "That aura," Neverin whispered, "it's stronger than before. Raiskin, what have you done?" Miranel stepped forward, her voice steadier than she felt. "The ledger holds the stories of every soul the Academy tried to forget. Malachar's curse, his sorrow, feeds on our refusal to remember. Raiskin has seen it all. He carries their pain, but also their hope. We can end this cycle if we face it together." Randall's expression softened, but he reached for Raiskin's hand, tracing the shadowy veins pulsing beneath his skin. "You have gone further into darkness than any student ever should. But perhaps if it is only by walking into the shadow that we can lead others out. Come, Raiskin, tell us everything you know of Malachar, and let us decide, as a faculty, what must be done next." Raiskin's confession poured forth under the watchful eyes of the Academy's most powerful mages. He spoke of visions. Malachar hunched in a candlelit chamber, quill scratching out the names of students lost to sorrow, his tears staining the ledger's brittle pages. Raiskin described the pain of being forgotten, reliving the moment when Malachar, once a scholar, was consumed by the Shadowfell's promise to erase grief, every vision memory, and echo he had experienced through the crystal and ledger was laid bare. With each truth spoken, the shadows around Raiskin thickened, flickering with ghostly faces and mournful whispers. Professor Neverin's hand tightened on his rune-carved token, eyes wide with both awe and dread. Thalarin muttered protective incantations, bracing as the room's temperature dropped. Yet Roundel remained composed, his presence a steady beacon, urging Raiskin onward with a silent nod. As Raiskin recounted how Malakar's curse fed on the Academy's refusal to remember its own wounds, the faculty exchanged uneasy glances. Miranel placed a gentle hand on Raiskin's arm, lending strength as his voice faltered. We must speak the names. We must honor their memories. That is the only way to break the cycle. Arandel finally spoke, his voice heavy with resolve. Then we must prepare a rite of remembrance, not just for Malachar, but for every soul the Academy has tried to forget. Raiskin, your burden is great, but your willingness to share it may be our salvation. Will you lead us in this, even if it means facing the full weight of Malachar's sorrow one last time? A hush fell over the solarium as Raskin's request settled in the lamplight. Randall straightened, his wise eyes searching each of the assembled professors. If we are to break this curse, we do so as one academy, the Archmage declared, his voice echoing with new resolve. Professor Nevern nodded, slipping his token into Raiskin's hand as a quiet pledge, while Professor Thalarin, reluctant but moved, began tracing runes of protection in the air. The faculty formed a circle with Raiskin, Moranal, and Tavern at its heart, the crystal and ledger placed at the center. The room grew colder as the circle closed, shadow and light mingling in uneasy truce. Randall led the invocation, but each professor, no matter how proud, spoke a name from the ledger, honoring a forgotten student or a lost colleague. With every name spoken, the shadows thinned, and the air brightened, the burden of sorrow shared and divided among many instead of crushing Raiskin alone. As Raiskin joined his voice, he felt the shadow's grip loosen upon his soul. The faces within the gloom became less menacing, more mournful, each one finding release in remembrance rather than in fear. Malachar's presence flickered nearby, not as a force of hunger, but as a silent witness, his eyes shining with gratitude and longing. At last, Roundel turned to Raiskin. The rite is not yet finished. There remains one last truth to speak. Malachar's own. Are you willing to face his final memory, with all of us beside you? Around the circle every faculty member waited, their concern and solidarity unmistakable. Raiskin stepped into the center of the circle, the distant wailing of wind at the solarium's windows swallowed by the hush of gathered breath. The ledger and black crystal pulsed at his feet, and as he opened his mind, the shadows thickened, swirling with motes of memory and sorrow. Professors and students alike pressed their palms to the circle's edge, channeling silent support. A cold current ran through Raiskin's veins as Malakar's presence approached, not the monstrous specter of nightmares, but the tired, grieving scholar. In his mind's eye, Raiskin saw the final memory Malachar seated alone in a forgotten study, ink-stained hands trembling as he penned the last names in the ledger. His voice cracked with anguish. If no one remembers, what am I but a shadow? The scene shimmered, and Malachar's gaze lifted to Raiskin. The scholar's sorrow washed outward, but this time, it mingled with something different, a fragile hope. Let them know we wanted kindness. Let them remember we loved, and lost, and tried. Raiskin spoke these words aloud, voice echoing in the solarium. The shadow magic within him convulsed, then steadied, as the circle's unity anchored him. One by one, professors added their voices, reciting the names of the lost and the lesson of Malachard remembrance is the greatest ward against darkness. Light flared from the crystal, dissolving the last chains around Malachar's memory. The Academy, for the first time in generations, bore witness. Together. As Raiskin raised his hands, the released energy from the crystal and ledger surged through the room. Threads of silver and midnight blue weaving together, carried by every voice that had joined the rite. He shaped the magic not as a barrier against darkness, but as a living ward, a lattice of remembrance, seated by every sorrow and hope spoken within the circle. The ward's aura expanded, suffusing the solarium, and then, like ripples in a pond, spreading through the halls of Blackstaff Academy. Randall and the professors channeled their power into the matrix, their expressions a mixture of awe and relief. Where the ward touched, old wounds soothed and faded, portraits whispered with memories, forgotten names reappeared on the academy rolls, and the air itself felt lighter. Malachar's memory, now at peace, drifted into the heart of the ward. No longer a curse, but a guardian spirit, his sorrow transformed into a watchful, benevolent presence. Moranel gasped softly, clutching Raiskin's arm as warmth replaced the chill in the air. "It's beautiful," she whispered, tears shining in her eyes. Professor Nevrin nodded gravely. "You have changed the academy, Raiskin, perhaps forever." But as the light of the ward settled, Professor Thallerin stepped forward, voice edged with lingering concern. "This magic is new, untested. Raiskin, your aura still bears a shadow deeper than any I have seen. Malachar is at rest, but what remains in you? We must understand it, before it grows into something the ward cannot contain." As the professors gathered tightly around Raiskin, the lamplight flickered against the warded glass, casting long shadows across the solarium's ancient stone floor. Professor Nevrin produced his rune-carved token, pressing it lightly to Raiskin's chest. Thallerin and the others joined hands, weaving a lattice of detection magic that shimmered, half silver, half obsidian, encircling Raiskin in a cocoon of shimmering light. Raiskin closed his eyes as the magic probed deeper than ever before. The professor's spells peeled back layers of his aurag, the echoes of Malachar's sorrow, the newer scars of the black crystal, and, deeper still, a strange, pulsing darkness that felt neither wholly foreign nor entirely his own. A collective shiver ran through the circle as they glimpsed it, a shadow that resisted classification, its heart woven with Raskin's earliest memories of loss and longing, but threaded through with something older, colder, like the chill of the Shadowfell itself. Professor Thallerin's voice was tight with alarm. "This is not Malachar's residue. There is a signature here, one that predates even your bond with him. Raiskin, what do you know of your own power's origin? Was there ever a moment, before the academy, when the darkness found you?" The room grew still, all eyes on Raiskin. Randall's gaze was gentle but unyielding. "We must understand, for your sake and the academy's. Will you let us delve further into your memories, into whatever lies beneath this shadow?" Raiskin nodded, his heart pounding as the professors joined their minds to his. their spells sinking deeper than any ritual he had ever known. The solarium faded. He was back in the mist-shrouded halls of memory, younger than he could remember, a child alone in a darkened nursery. Shadows coiled along the wainscoting, not malevolent but curiously alive, whispering comfort when he cried, flickering protectively when nightmares stalked his dreams. He realized, with a shudder, that the darkness had always been there. Years before Malachar, before the academy. A sudden, collective gasp rippled through the professors. Professor Neverin's voice, strained, echoed in the mindscaping. This presence. It is not an imprint. It is a bond. Something ancient, perhaps from birth. Raiskin, did anyone in your family ever speak of shadow magic, or dark bargains made to protect the line? Raiskin faltered, fragments of stories surfacing, his father's warnings, his mother's lingering glances at the family locket, the old tales of an ancestor who vanished during the spell plague. The shadows in the vision seemed to respond, forming a spectral figure, a robed scholar, faceless, holding a locket out to Raiskin's child self. The image shimmered with both sorrow and longing, and for a heartbeat. Raiskin felt a pulse of recognition, as if the darkness within him had always yearned to be seen, not feared. The professors withdrew, visibly shaken. Archmage Rundle's eyes were grave. This is no ordinary curse. Malachar was drawn to you, not the other way around. The Academy must learn everything about this inheritance, if we are to protect you and ourselves from what's to come. Raiskin gathered Moranil and Tavern in the quiet alcove near the solarium, the hum of the new ward thrumming softly through the stone. He recounted the vision, the faceless ancestor, the outstretched locket, and the sense that his family's line had always been entwined with shadow magic, even before Malachar's touch. Miranel listened intently, her hand hovering near his, while Tavern's brow furrowed in concern. The locket. Miranel ventured. Your mother gave it to you for luck, didn't she? Maybe there's more to it. Has it ever reacted to your magic? Tavern nodded, then produced a scrap of parchment. If your family's past is connected, there might be records in the Academy's archives. Or, his voice dropped, the vaults beneath the east wing. Those places were shielded when the ward was cast. Raiskin unclasped the locket, laying it in his palm. Shadows flickered around its edges, almost pulsing in time with his heartbeat. For a moment, a faint sigil, one he didn't recognize, glimmered on its surface, then faded. Miranel's eyes widened. That's old magic. We need to trace that mark. The three friends exchanged a determined glance. The Academy's transformation was only the beginning. Answers about Raiskin's inheritance, and perhaps the web of cursed artifacts, lay tangled in the past. Together, they resolved to follow the sigil's trail, even if it led straight into the heart of Blackstaff's oldest secrets. Professor Neverin examined the locket with a careful, almost reverent touch, his spectacles glinting in the lamp's steady glow. He traced the faint sigil with a slender wand, murmuring an incantation that made the mark flare briefly. Deep violet against silver. This is not just a family crest, he whispered, eyes wide. It's a warding glyph, old, predating even the founding of Blackstaff. It's meant to contain, or perhaps anchor, a fragment of shadow magic within the bloodline. Miranel leaned in, her breath catching. So Raiskin's family has been guardians, or prisoners, of this magic for generations. Neverin nodded, his gaze troubled. It would explain why Malachar's presence latched so easily onto you, Raiskin. But more than that, it means your locket, and perhaps you, are part of the network that sustains the Shadow's influence. If the artifacts scattered through the Academy resonate with this glyph, they're all connected. Tavern's face paled as he turned the locket over in Nevern's palm. If the network is anchored by blood and memory, then breaking it might require more than just destroying objects. It might need a ritual, one that severs old bonds and forges new ones. Nevern met Raiskin's eyes with grave determination. We must identify every artifact and anchor bearing this sigil. Only then can we attempt to unravel Malachar's web and free you and the Academy from its grasp. Will you help us trace the network? Knowing it may mean facing your own family's secrets at the heart of it. With Professor Nevern's guidance, Raiskin, Miranel, and Tavern set out into the Academy's labyrinthine corridors, searching for objects that resonated with the locket's sigil. Miranel, her brow furrowed in concentration, wove a subtle illusion over Raiskin's palm, causing the glyph to shimmer faintly whenever they neared a hidden anchor. Their first stop was the Hall of Founders, a vaulted gallery lined with ancient portraits and relics, each humming with a faint, uneasy magic. As they passed beneath the gaze of long-dead archmages, Tavern's mage light flickered near an old silver inkwell sealed beneath glass. The sigil on the locket pulsed in response, and Miranel's illusion revealed ghostly tendrils of shadow connecting the inkwell to a sconce across the hall. "There's a pattern," she murmured, tracing the shadowy web as it threaded from artifact to artifact: a cracked hourglass, a ceremonial dagger, a faded tapestry. Each bore the hidden mark, together forming a network that pulsed with sorrow and memory. Raiskin's senses tingled as the web grew clear. The anchors didn't just link to each other, they radiated outward, touching secret places in the Academy and winding through his own heart. The realization was dizzying. To break Malachar's influence, they would have to unravel not only the physical network, but the living memories and pain it bound together. Nevern's voice, steady and resolute, echoed from behind. "You three have seen what others have missed for decades. The next step is dangerous. If you choose it, do we try to sever a single anchor, risking the web's wrath, or map the entire network first and attempt a ritual to break it all at once?" The trio moved quietly from the hall, Miranel's illusion transforming the locket's glyph into a ghostly beacon. With every artifact they uncovered, a cracked hourglass, a ceremonial dagger, a faded tapestry, the shadowy threads connecting them became more visible, forming a vast web that pulsed with sorrow. Tavern meticulously mapped each anchor's location on a sheet of parchment, his hands growing unsteady as he realized the enormity of the network. As Raiskin neared a forgotten plinth in the library's shadowed alcove, the glyph on his locket flared brightest yet. Miranel gasped as she traced the connecting lines in the air, seeing the web's center converge on this very spot. "This isn't just a network," she breathed. "It's a ritual circle, one that spans the entire Academy. Malachar's influence is growing stronger each time someone interacts with these artifacts." Professor Nevern, keeping watch nearby, nodded grimly. "We must move swiftly. If Malachar's presence is amplified by this network, a surge, accidental or deliberate, could trigger a catastrophic ritual. Mapping the web is crucial, but you three are at the heart of it now. The next move is yours. A cold wind swept through the corridor, bringing a whispered echo of Malachar's voicing, "Remember, or be consumed." The weight of generations pressed on Raiskin's shoulders. Breaking the web would mean shattering not just magical bonds, but the stories and grief that bound them all. Raiskin pressed his palm, glowing faintly with Miranel's illusion, against the cold stone of the central plinth. A jolt of shadow magic rushed through him, and the world seemed to blur. For an instant he saw not the library, but a grand hall from centuries past. Students gathered in rows, their faces tense with anticipation, a somber ceremony unfolding beneath banners heavy with dust. At the center, a young woman clutched the same locket Raiskin now wore, her eyes shining with grief as she recited names of friends lost to magical accidents, to exile, to the price of knowledge. Pain blossomed in Raiskin's chest, the sorrow of generations, the ache of unspoken memory. He felt the network's threads vibrating with each name, binding the living and the dead. Malachar's presence loomed at the edges not as a monster, but as a silent witness, feeding on the pain left unshared. The memory pulsed, and Raiskin saw how the web had been woven deliberately, a magical tradition of remembrance that, when abandoned, had curdled into a prison of sorrow and shadow. Miranel's hand tightened on his shoulder, grounding him. Tavern's voice called his name, distant but real. Raiskin forced himself back, heart pounding. The vision's truth echoing in his mind. The network was never meant to be a curse, but a living memorial. Only by honoring the memories, by speaking the lost names once more, could the web be unraveled without catastrophe. Nevrin, seeing Raiskin's shaken expression, asked, "What did you see? Is there a way to transform the ritual, instead of simply breaking it?" The answer lingered on Raiskin's lips, trembling between hope and dread. The trio slipped into the Academy's archives, deep beneath layers of enchantment and dust. Oil lamps cast wavering shadows over rows of ancient ledgers and brittle scrolls. Miranel's illusion flickered over the spines, searching for the sigil's subtle echo. Tavern's nervous breath fogged in the chill as Raiskin's fingers traced titles until one massive tome, bound in cracked blue leather, responded with a faint shimmer of shadow. They opened the tome, revealing a ledger of names, dates, and cryptic notations. Students lost to magical mishaps, faculty exiled after scandal, apprentices vanished without trace. The ink was faded, but as Raiskin pressed his locket to the page, the sorrow in the air thickened, and the names whispered to them, "Please for remembrance." Miranel's eyes filled with tears as she deciphered a string of forgotten names, her voice trembling as she read them aloud. The shadowy web outside the archives pulsed in response, as if the act of speaking these names weakened its bonds. Professor Nevrin entered quietly, bearing a battered box and a look of grim approval. "You've found the heart of it," he said. "If you're to transform the ritual, these names must be spoken in the Hall of Founders, where the anchors are strongest. But beware, Malachar's presence will resist. You must channel not only your own sorrow, Raiskin, but the collective memory of the Academy." The weight of history pressed upon the group. The path forward was clear but perilous. Only by honoring every forgotten soul, publicly and together, could they hope to unravel the web without unleashing Malachar's wrath. The Hall of Founders loomed ahead, pillars etched with runes of memory, its vaulted ceiling echoing with the whispers of centuries past. Raiskin, Moranal, Tavern, and Professor Nevrin entered in solemn procession, the battered ledger and box of tokens cradled in Nevrin's arms. Shadows flickered at the edges of the chamber, restless and expectant. Raiskin's locket pulsed in time with his heart, guiding him to the days at the center of the hall. As students and faculty gathered, drawn by silent summons and the gravity of the moment, Raiskin steadied his breath. Moranal unfurled a shimmering illusion above the days, projecting the faded names and faces from the ledger into the air. Tavern's voice, steady despite his nerves, began to read: Alaron Viren, Lyra the Forgotten, Master Selkith. Each name spoken sent a tremor through the hall, the web of shadow magic outside recoiling and shifting. Raiskin felt Malachar's presence intensify, a cold, desperate hunger at the edge of his mind. He pressed on, speaking names with purpose, letting sorrow and hope mingle in his voice. The air thickened as the network's anchors responded, some with resistance, others with relief. Nevron joined in, his deep voice resonating through the stone, inviting faculty and students alike to add their voices in remembrance. A hush fell as the final name echoed. The web's tension mounted, a deep vibration thrumming through Raiskin's bones. Malachar's whispers seeped into the silence. Will you break the chain, or become its next link? The moment of transformation was at hand. The Academy, and Raiskin, stood at the threshold between curse and catharsis. Raiskin closed his eyes, clutching the locket as if anchoring himself against the icy surge of Malachar's presence. Shadows coiled around the days, drawn to the sorrow he channeled, his own pain intertwining with centuries of forgotten grief. The locket grew warm, filling his mind with the memory of the young woman from his vision, each name she had spoken blossoming like a flame in the darkness. He spoke her name aloud, Alira Durander, and the resonance echoed outward, fracturing the web of shadow that bound the hall. Suddenly, the air shimmered. Malachar's form emerged, not monstrous, but a gaunt scholar draped in spectral robes, eyes hollow with longing and regret. His voice trembled between hope and rage. Why do you awaken these wounds, child? Will you share their burden, or let sorrow consume you as it did me? The shadows pressed closer, testing Raiskin's resolve, pressing him to the brink of despair. Moranal stepped beside him, her illusion weaving light through the darkness, projecting images of laughter, friendship, and the lost moments the Academy had buried. Tavern added his voice, offering memories of courage and forgiveness. The hall filled with a chorus of voices, students and faculty alike, joining the rite of remembrance. The web of corruption trembled, not with destruction, but with the possibility of healing. Malachar's eyes glistened with tears. You remember, he whispered, the shadow magic around him flickering uncertainly. The moment hung in balance. Raiskin could either offer forgiveness, demand answers, or attempt to bind Malachar's spirit forever. The fate of the Academy, and the nature of the web, depended on his next words. Malachar's form shimmered, the shadowy robes flickering between substance and memory. His gaze met Raiskin's, ancient pain mirrored in his spectral eyes. You wish to know how the web began. His voice trembled, echoing in the stone hall as all fell silent. Once, the ritual of remembrance was pure, a circle of scholars, my brothers and sisters, gathered to honor every loss. but fear crept in. The Academy's leaders wished to spare their students pain, so they sealed sorrow away, first with gentle wards, then with chains of shadow. He gestured, and images danced in the air. A younger Malachar, surrounded by hopeful faces, inscribing runes of memory into crystal and staff. We believed we could protect the living from grief, yet every name we hid became an anchor. My own sorrow was the first link. My love lost to magic's folly. My friends too afraid to speak her name. The magic twisted. I tried to bear it alone, but the pain festered. When I finally broke, the shadow consumed me, and the network was born. The web pulsed with his confession, strands unraveling and reforming. The others who followed, the ones exiled, forgotten, their pain fed the chain. And so the Academy's mercy became its curse, each memory sealed, each sorrow denied. Another link for Malachar the Watcher. Tears traced spectral lines down his face. You have the power to break this, Raiskin. Not by force, but by returning remembrance to the living. Will you bear this burden openly, or hide it again? The hall waited, breathless. The truth was out. The web was woven not just of magic, but of every sorrow left unspoken. To be a stranger, Raiskin's next act would determine whether remembrance would heal or doom them all. Raiskin's voice rang clear through the Hall of Founders, trembling with both fear and compassion. Malachar, he said, you bore this pain alone for too long. Let it end here, not with banishment or chains, but with remembrance and forgiveness. Will you stand beside us as watcher and guide, so that no sorrow is ever hidden again? The spectral scholar's form wavered, his eyes wide with disbelief and hope. The web of shadow magic pulsed, then softened, its dark threads unraveling into streams of gentle light. Malachar bowed his head, spectral tears falling to the mosaic floor. I accept, he whispered, not as master nor prisoner, but as one who remembers. A hush fell as Malachar stepped to Raiskin's side, his presence no longer cold and hungry, but solemn and protective. The lingering shadows gathered around the days, their forms resolving into the faint outlines of scholars and students lost to memory. Mirinal's illusion shimmered brighter, entwining the names and faces from the ledger with the spectral figures. At last, the web revealed its true nature, not a prison, but a network of remembrance waiting to be healed. Professor Neverin, voice thick with emotion, raised the battered box above his head. Let us finish what was begun, he proclaimed. With Malachar's guidance, we will remake the ritual, one that honors all who came before and all who will follow. Raiskin, the choice is yours. How will you shape the new rite of remembrance? Raiskin's hands trembled as he lifted the locket, its hidden sigil glowing softly within his palm. The hall's magic thickened, all eyes fixed on him. With a deep breath, he let his grief surge forth, his fear of losing himself, the pain of isolation, the sorrow of friends nearly broken by shadow. The locket pulsed, casting silvery light across the room, entwining with the wavering threads of shadow and hope that filled the Hall of Founders. Malachar stood beside him, no longer a figure of dread, but a tall, grave scholar radiating compassion. Let the living and the lost speak together, he intoned. Miranal reached out, her hand atop Raiskin's, illusion magic weaving images of those who had been forgotten, students, professors, friends whose names had vanished from the ledgers. Tavern's voice joined, steady and resolute, anchoring the ritual in forgiveness, not fear. The web of corruption, now revealed as a network of memory, responded. The names and faces echoed in light and shadow, each memory accepted and honored. The shadows softened, and the Academy's wards shimmered with new strength, no longer fueled by denial, but by honest remembrance. Professor Nevrin stepped forward, reverently placing the battered box at the center of the circle. "We will remember together," he declared, voice breaking with emotion. As the ritual reached its crescendo, Raiskin sensed Malachar's presence diffusing through the Academy, not as a curse, but as a watchful, gentle guardian. The burden of sorrow lightened, replaced by a sense of unity. For the first time, the Academy's wounds began to heal. Yet Raiskin knew the work was not done. The final shape of the new tradition would depend on the choices made in these next moments. A hush fell as Raiskin's invitation rippled through the Hall of Founders. One by one, students, professors, and staff stepped forward. Some timidly, others with trembling resolve. Murinal's illusions wove their memories into shimmering images, a lost sister's laughter, the last words of a departed mentor, the tears of exile and regret. The locket's light flared brighter with each offering, the web growing richer, more complex, as sorrow and hope mingled before the entire assembly. Professor Talaran knelt, placing a conjurer's badge beside the battered box. "For my brother, forgotten by the Academy's silence." Lorali, silver hair gleaming, pressed her ring into the circle, her voice steady, "For all those we loved and lost." Even Archmage Randall placed his staff's black crystal atop the pile, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "Let this be our covenant, no more names lost to shadow." The hall's wards blazed with new power, the network of artifacts pulsing in harmony. Malachar's form shimmered, his sorrow transformed into a gentle strength as he helped guide each memory into the web. For a moment, Raiskin saw the entire Academy, its towers, crypts, and crowded chambers, bathed in light and shadow, every pain and triumph woven into a tapestry that would never again be hidden. As the ritual drew to its close, the assembly stood united, the weight of centuries of silence finally lifted. Yet Raiskin sensed the final choice remained: how this new tradition would endure, and what safeguards would keep it from falling back into secrecy and fear. The web was healed, but the future was theirs to shape.